Everyone said we were perfect. When I walked into the neighborhood cafe with Daniel's arm draped across my shoulder, people turned. He had that effect on others. Charming, assured, the kind of man who looked as though life bent in his favor. I smiled because I was expected to, because that was the picture we had painted together. The successful husband, the devoted wife, the dream couple everyone envied. At dinner parties, friends marveled at our synchronized stories, how we seemed to know what the other would say before the words even left our lips. "You two were made for each other," they'd whisper, clinking glasses of red wine, their envy poorly masked. Daniel would glance at me with that familiar grin, the one that asked me to play along, and I always did. Yet behind closed doors, perfection had edges. Late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I felt him roll away, his breathing steady but distant. I would reach for him only to find cool sheets where his warmth should have been. I told myself it was nothing, that marriages grew comfortable, that love evolved into something quieter. But sometimes in the silence a pit opened inside me, wide and consuming. I tried to fill it with routines. Coffee at 7 a.m., the faint hum of the dishwasher after breakfast, the way sunlight curved across the kitchen tiles. If I could focus on the details, I didn't have to confront the gnawing doubt pressing at the edges of my mind. Daniel's tenderness was selective. In public, he was affectionate, generous with compliments, protective in ways that drew admiration. In private, he could be dismissive, distracted, and when I asked if something was wrong, he would laugh, brush it off, and kiss my forehead as though I were a child worrying over nothing. "Don't be silly, Em," he'd murmur. "We're fine." But fine had begun to sound like a verdict. I never admitted these thoughts to anyone, not my sister, not even to myself in the mirror. Instead, I smiled at Daniel's jokes, ironed his shirts before work, and played the role of the woman who had everything. 'Cause wasn't that what I was supposed to be? Still, there were moments, fleeting sharp, when I caught a flicker in his eyes, a shadow that didn't belong in a happy marriage. And though I told myself not to dwell on it, deep down I knew. Perfection was only the mask. Something darker was waiting beneath. Tomorrow I would begin to hear it, the whispers in the dark. The first time I heard it, I told myself it didn't matter. It was just after midnight. The house hushed except for the low murmur of Daniel's voice drifting from the study. His tone was careful, almost rehearsed. Nothing like the warmth he used with me. I sat up in bed, straining to catch fragments, but the words were blurred by distance. All I knew was that he wasn't talking to a colleague about work, no matter how he might later insist otherwise. When his footsteps approached, I slipped back under the covers, feigning sleep. The door creaked open. Light spilled briefly across the floor, and I heard the faint click of his phone being set on the nightstand. He slid in beside me, breathing slow and heavy, as though nothing had happened. The next morning, I asked casually, "Late call?" "Client in Singapore," he said, his fork scraping against the plate. His answer was smooth, practiced. Too practiced. I laughed lightly as if convinced. Inside, my stomach twisted. Over the following weeks, the calls multiplied. Sometimes he would step out onto the porch, the cold night air wrapping around him, voice hushed and deliberate. Other times he lingered in the car after pulling into the driveway, words spilling into the darkness while I waited by the window, unseen. I told myself not to snoop, not to become the paranoid wife in movies, but unease began to shape my days. A faint chill hung in the air between us. His eyes met mine less often. His kisses at the door were shorter, mechanical, as though he was running through a checklist. One evening I confronted him. "Daniel, is there something you're not telling me?" He looked up from his laptop, brows knitting together in practiced confusion. "What are you talking about?" "The calls. The late nights. You've been different." He sighed, leaned back, and gave a gentle laugh that stung more than a slap. "Emma, listen to yourself. You're imagining things. You've always been a worrier." The words pressed down on me, heavy, suffocating. Gaslight flickered behind his smile. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded, swallowing my doubts. But when I turned away, tears pricked my eyes. Because I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't be. One night, curiosity overcame restraint. I padded softly into the hallway, drawn to the glow beneath the study door. His voice was low but urgent. "No, not yet. She can't know." My breath caught. I pressed my hand over my mouth, retreating silently to the bedroom. My body shook with the weight of what I'd heard. She can't know. Who was she? What couldn't I know? I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls close in. And in the morning, as Daniel kissed my cheek and left for work, I realized something chilling. The stranger's shadow was already moving through my life, and I was about to find it. The morning after the whispers, I noticed it for the first time, a pale silk scarf, folded neatly on the back seat of Daniel's car. It wasn't mine. I never wore silk, and certainly not in that shade of icy blue. I touched it hesitantly, as though it might burn me, inhaling a faint perfume that didn't belong to our home. It lingered in the air, light and floral, clinging stubbornly to the fabric. I waited for Daniel to mention it, to laugh and say a colleague must have left it behind. But he said nothing. He drove us to dinner with friends, chatting easily about promotions and holiday plans, while the scarf sat between us like a loaded gun neither of us acknowledged. That night, when we returned, I couldn't hold it in. "Daniel, whose scarf is that?" I asked as he slipped off his jacket. He froze just for a second before turning with a smile too quick, too smooth. "What scarf?" "The one in your car, blue, perfume all over it." His jaw tightened. "Emma, you're imagining things again. You've been stressed lately." I felt my face flush. "I touched it, Daniel." "I know what I saw." The smile vanished. He slammed his keys onto the counter, the sharp clang jolting me. "You're paranoid. Do you hear yourself? Accusing me over some piece of cloth? Do you think so little of me?" His voice was louder than it had ever been with me, sharp enough to cut. My hands trembled as I tried to speak, but he towered over me, his eyes dark, furious. "You're wrong," he said, pointing a finger like an accusation. "You're creating problems where there are none. If you keep this up, Emma, you'll destroy us." Tears welled in my eyes, though I refused to let them fall in front of him. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but my body betrayed me, retreating into silence. Later, alone in the bedroom, I buried my face in the pillow, the faint perfume still haunting my senses. I told myself maybe he was right. Maybe I was spiraling into suspicion for no reason. Yet the image of that scarf, the weight of his fury, refused to fade. For days, the tension stretched between us like a fraying rope. Daniel was outwardly affectionate again, bringing me flowers, kissing my hand in front of friends. But I felt the performance in every gesture. Behind his charm, I sensed something unspoken, something carefully hidden. And when I slipped into the car one evening to fetch my bag, that perfume was still there, faint but undeniable, woven into the fabric of our lives. I leaned back in the seat, heart-pounding realization clawing at my mind. There was someone else, a shadow moving closer, entwined with Daniel's world. And if I wanted to understand, I would have to dig deeper into his past, into the sins he thought were buried. The perfume clung to me even after I left the car. No amount of soap or distraction could erase it. It wasn't just a scent anymore. It was a reminder, a warning. That night, as Daniel slept beside me, I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Questions circled endlessly, and for the first time I wondered if the cracks I sensed in our marriage stretched deeper than I dared admit. Somewhere in him, there were shadows I had never touched, and shadows have a way of remembering. Years earlier, long before I met him, Daniel had been a different man, reckless, cruel when cornered. He grew up in a small town where charm was currency and violence was survival. One summer night, after too many drinks and too much pride, he'd cornered a man in an alley, someone who had crossed him, someone who threatened to expose truths Daniel wanted buried. The confrontation turned ugly. Words gave way to fists and fists to something darker. The man collapsed, blood glistening on the pavement beneath the flicker of a street lamp. Daniel stood over him, chest heaving, the world spinning in silence. He told himself it wasn't murder. Not exactly. But he never stayed long enough to see if the man rose again. Instead, he walked away. He buried the memory, locked it behind charm and ambition, built a life so polished no one thought to look deeper. Except perhaps the woman with the blue scarf. Back in the present, I began my own quiet search. I waited until Daniel left for work, then pulled his old boxes from the attic. Dusty, forgotten. Bank statements, scraps of letters, an old photograph of him with people I didn't recognize. One face in particular stood out. A woman with sharp eyes, her hand resting on his shoulder like a claim. I traced her image, my stomach twisting. Could she be the shadow slipping into our marriage now? My heart pounded as I shoved the photo back into the box. If Daniel discovered I'd been digging, I didn't know what he might do. That evening, when he walked through the door, he kissed me with an easy smile, the mask perfectly intact. But now I knew it was just that, a mask. And as I set the table, forcing a smile of my own, I couldn't ignore the chill whispering through me. Daniel's past wasn't dead. It was alive, crawling back into our present, and soon it would demand to be seen. The photograph of the woman with sharp eyes wouldn't leave me. She followed me into dreams, standing in doorways, whispering secrets I couldn't hear. When I woke, the silence beside Daniel felt heavier than ever. I told myself I needed proof, something tangible to confirm what my instincts screamed. That's when I thought of his accounts. Daniel had always managed our finances, brushing me aside with reassuring jokes about how numbers bored me. But now, boredom felt like blindness. While he showered one Saturday morning, I slipped into his study and opened his laptop. My hands shook as I typed in the password I'd memorized from watching him years ago. The screen blinked to life, and with it, the carefully ordered world he never wanted me to see. It didn't take long. The transactions were right there, thousands siphoned away into an account I didn't recognize. Regular payments, withdrawals, transfers made late at night, time between his so-called client calls. My throat tightened as I scrolled, the truth bleeding across the screen like ink spreading through water. When he walked in, water still dripping from his hair. I didn't have time to close it. His eyes darted to the laptop, then to me. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Tell me about these accounts, Daniel." My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. "Who are you sending money to?" His jaw clenched. He strode across the room, slamming the laptop shut. "You went through my files. Jesus, Emma, have you lost your mind? You've been lying to me," I shouted, the months of doubt erupting all at once. "The late nights, the scarf, the perfume, don't you dare tell me I'm imagining this." He stood inches from me, breath hot with fury. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," I whispered. Something in him snapped. His hand shot forward, shoving me back against the desk. The impact rattled through me, knocking the air from my chest. I froze, wide-eyed, as he loomed above, his face twisted with rage. For a moment I thought he might strike me again. Then, just as suddenly, the anger broke. His features softened, tears brimming at the corners of his eyes. "Emma, God, I'm sorry." His hands shook as he reached for me. I didn't mean it. Everything's been so stressful. I lost control. I pushed his arms away, trembling, but he dropped to his knees, clutching my hands, sobbing into them. "You're all I have. Don't give up on me, please." The performance was perfect, so perfect that a part of me almost believed him. Almost. That night, as he held me close, whispering apologies into my hair, I stared into the dark, my body stiff in his embrace. The bruise on my side throbbed with every breath, a reminder that love had shifted into something more dangerous. And the next day, when I noticed faint stains on the kitchen floor, red, almost hidden, I realized the violence wasn't ending. It was only beginning. The bruise from Daniel's shove was still tender when I walked into the house that evening, arms heavy with groceries. At first I thought the smell was just dinner left too long on the stove. But as I stepped into the kitchen, I froze. Dark stains streaked the tiled floor, smeared in uneven arcs. My chest tightened. It wasn't wine. It wasn't sauce. It was blood. I dropped the bags, apples scattering across the floor. "Daniel?" My voice cracked in the empty air. He appeared moments later from the hallway, sleeves rolled up, a kitchen towel wrapped around his hand. His smile was strained, forced. "Relax, Sam." I cut myself while chopping onions. "It looks worse than it is." I stared at the towel. The spots blooming through the fabric were fresh, wet. But when I glanced at the counter, the cutting board was clean, knives washed and drying neatly in the rack. Too neat, my throat felt dry. "That's a lot of blood for just an onion." He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're overreacting again. Always looking for a reason to panic." Gaslight flickering again. I forced a nod, though unease coiled tight in my stomach. He wrapped his arms around me, pressing a kiss to my forehead. The metallic tang of blood lingered between us. I'll clean up the mess. Don't worry. Later, after he went upstairs, I crouched down and traced the stains with trembling fingers. The smears were dragged, not dripped, as though something heavy had been moved, pulled across the tiles. My skin prickled. From that night forward, I started documenting everything. I kept a small notebook hidden in the lining of my purse, recording times, words, expressions, the tiniest inconsistencies, the scarf, the phone calls, the financial transfers, and now the blood. Each detail stitched together into a pattern too sharp to ignore. But paranoia has a cost. I began watching him like prey, noting how he lingered too long near the garage, how his phone never left his side. He must have felt it, the shift in my eyes, because his smiles grew sharper, his touch heavier, as though he needed to remind me who was in control. At night, when his arm draped across me, it no longer felt protective. It felt like a restraint. One evening I opened the notebook again, staring at the scattered pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet solve. Somewhere among them was the truth, and I knew that to find it, I would have to follow the shadow of the other woman. Her name came to me by accident. Daniel left his phone on the counter one morning, rushing upstairs to grab his tie. A message flashed across the screen before it dimmed again. "Julia, we need to talk." My breath caught, pulse hammering. By the time Daniel returned, the phone was gone, tucked securely into his pocket, his smile too effortless. That name echoed in my mind for days, scratching at the edges of my thoughts until I finally gave in. I followed him. It was a Tuesday night. He told me he had a late meeting downtown, kissed my cheek, and left. I waited 10 minutes before slipping into my car, my hands clammy on the wheel as I trailed his headlights through winding streets. He parked near a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Through the window I saw her, the woman from the old photograph, the one with sharp eyes, Julia. She leaned across the table, her expression tense, her hands slicing the air as she spoke. Daniel's face was drawn, defensive, not the charming mask he wore for me. I sat in the shadows of my car, heart pounding as I watched. At one point, Julia slid a small envelope across the table. Daniel snatched it quickly, stuffing it into his jacket, his gaze flicking around the room like a hunted man. It wasn't romance I saw in their meeting. It was something darker, urgent. When he finally left, I stayed. I needed to see her alone. Minutes later, Julia stepped out, shoulders hunched, her eyes scanning the parking lot. Up close, she looked older than the photograph. Wearier, but her presence was sharp. Commanding, I followed her. She walked briskly, cutting through side streets. Before entering a narrow apartment building with peeling paint, I hesitated outside, the night pressing in around me. A dim light flickered in her window. My instinct screamed that Julia wasn't just the other woman. She was something else entirely, someone who carried Daniel's secrets in her hands. The next day, while Daniel showered, I rifled through his jacket. The envelope was gone, but I found the faint trace of that same perfume clinging to the fabric. My stomach twisted. Julia wasn't just in his present, she was tied to his past, the one he had tried to bury. That evening I wrote her name in my hidden notebook, underlined twice, Julia. The pieces were forming a picture, but not the one I had expected. This wasn't an affair, it was leverage. Julia knew something about Daniel, something worth money, worth late-night meetings, worth lies, and if she knew the truth, then she was the key to everything. But keys can open doors, and they can lock them forever. The next time I saw her, I would make sure she told me what Daniel was hiding, even if it meant stepping into the shadows he'd spent years trying to escape. I had just written Julia's name in my notebook when Daniel confronted me. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his eyes shadowed, his hands buried in his pockets. "You've been distant," he said flatly, watching me, snooping. My throat tightened. He'd noticed. "I just feel like you're hiding something." His gaze flickered, then dropped. For the first time, I saw cracks in his armor. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe I am," he whispered. The silence between us stretched, brittle and suffocating. Then in a voice raw with weariness, he began to talk. "There are things I've done, Emma. things I'm not proud of. When I was younger, I got mixed up with people I shouldn't have. I hurt someone. His jaw tightened, his eyes glassy. It was an accident, but I couldn't take it back. I thought I'd buried it. But people, he stopped, shaking his head. They don't forget. They don't forgive, my heart pounded. Julia, I breathed, his head snapped up, eyes narrowing. You've seen her? The sharpness in his voice betrayed the fragility of his confession. He recovered quickly, softening his tone. She's not what you think. She's dangerous. She knows what happened that night. She's using it against me, blackmailing me. I'm the victim here, Emma. She won't leave me alone. Victim. The word hung between us, heavy, unconvincing. You should have told me, I whispered. I couldn't, he said, tears welling in his eyes. He reached for my hand, gripping it tight. I didn't want to lose you. You're all I have. For a moment I wavered. The sight of him breaking down, vulnerable and afraid, clawed at my heart. But then I remembered the shove, the blood on the floor, the way he had twisted every doubt into paranoia. His tears were part of the performance. A mask, still I nodded, letting him believe I was swayed. His grip tightened, his relief palpable. But with his confession came something darker. His control grew sharper in the days that followed. He started checking my phone, asking where I'd been, who I spoke to. When the mailman lingered too long at the door, Daniel's hand rested firmly on my shoulder, his smile brittle. People will try to come between us, he warned one night, his breath hot against my ear. Don't let them. Don't trust anyone. It wasn't advice. It was a threat. And when I tried to call my sister just to hear a familiar voice, Daniel appeared suddenly, his expression calm but his words cutting. If you drag anyone into this, Emma, I can't protect them. Do you understand? I nodded, fear tightening around my ribs like a vice. Lying beside him that night, I knew the truth. I wasn't married to a victim. I was married to a man building a cage around me, and soon, someone outside would start knocking on the bars. The knock came on a Wednesday afternoon. Sharp and deliberate, I froze in the hallway, notebook hidden beneath a floorboard in the bedroom. Daniel was at work, leaving me alone in the quiet house. My first thought was that Julia had come, but when I opened the door, it wasn't her. Mrs. Whitmore? The man on the porch flashed a badge. Detective Harris. May I come in? His voice was steady, his eyes sharp but not unkind. I stepped aside, pulse racing. He entered slowly, glancing around the living room with the practiced gaze of someone who noticed everything. I won't take much of your time, he said, settling onto the edge of the sofa. I'm investigating a missing person. Julia Myers. You may have heard the name. The sound of it on his lips sent a shiver down my spine. I forced a neutral expression. I don't think so. He studied me, the silence heavy. We know she's been in contact with your husband. My breath caught, but I hid it behind a sip of water. Daniel has a lot of clients. Julia isn't a client, Harris replied calmly. She's someone tied to his past, and now she's disappeared. Neighbors saw your husband meeting her recently. He leaned forward. I need you to be honest with me, Mrs. Whitmore. Did you notice anything unusual? His words clawed at me. This was the moment, truth pressing at my throat. I could tell him about the scarf, the money, the blood. I could beg for protection, step outside the cage Daniel had built around me. But then I remembered Daniel's warning, his hand heavy on my shoulder, his voice low and lethal. If you drag anyone into this, I can't protect them, I swallowed hard. No, I whispered. I haven't seen anything. The disappointment in Harris's eyes was subtle, but it cut deep. He nodded slowly, standing. If you remember something, anything at all, call me. He handed me a card. His fingers lingered just a moment, as if he sensed the war inside me. When the door closed, I sank against it, my body trembling. The card burned in my hand like a lifeline I didn't dare grab. By the time Daniel came home, the house was spotless, dinner on the table, my smile painted carefully in place. But as I lay in bed that night, I stared at Harris's card hidden beneath my pillow. And I knew the truth was closing in, and Daniel's mask wouldn't hold forever, and when it shattered, someone would bleed. Daniel changed after the detective's visit. He didn't know Harris had come while he was at work, but something in him sharpened, as though he could smell the truth pressing against the walls of our home. His questions multiplied. Who called while I was gone? Where did you go this afternoon? Why did you move my jacket? His eyes never left mine, searching for cracks. At first, I played along, but the suspicion only grew. He began locking his study door, keeping his phone on him even in the shower. Sleep eluded him. I'd wake in the night to find him pacing the hall, muttering under his breath. One evening, as I prepared dinner, he slammed his fist onto the counter, making me jump. "You've been talking to someone," he hissed. I shook my head. "Daniel, no, don't lie to me." His face twisted red with fury. "Did you tell the detective something?" "Did you?" My lips parted, but no sound came. The truth hovered like glass between us, fragile, waiting to shatter. He grabbed my arm, yanking me close, his grip bruising. "You think you can betray me? After everything I've done to protect us?" His breath was hot, suffocating. I didn't say anything, I whispered, my voice trembling, but paranoia had consumed him. His other hand shot out, sweeping the dishes off the counter. Porcelain shattered on the floor, shards glittering like knives. He shoved me backward, and I fell hard against the cabinets, pain bursting through my side. In that instant, something inside me broke too. Fear turned to fire. I scrambled to my feet, my hand closing around a jagged shard of porcelain. He advanced, eyes wild, a stranger wearing my husband's face. "If I can't trust you, Emma, then no one can have you." The word sealed my choice. As he lunged, I thrust the shard forward. It sank into his chest, a wet gasp tearing from his throat. His eyes widened in shock, rage melting into disbelief. He staggered, clutching the wound, crimson spilling across his shirt. For a heartbeat, the world was silent. Then he collapsed, the thud echoing through the kitchen. Blood spread quickly across the tiles, dark and glistening under the light. I stood frozen, shard trembling in my hand, breath ragged. My body shook, but my mind was eerily clear. The cage was broken, but so was I. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Real or imagined, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same, and soon, the aftermath of truth would come crashing down. The kitchen floor was still slick with blood when the police arrived. I remember the flashing lights painting the walls in red and blue, the blur of voices, the steady hand of an officer guiding me outside. My clothes clung to me, sticky with Daniel's life, my hands trembling as though they would never stop. At the station, under the white glare of interrogation lamps, the story spilled from me in fragments. The scarf, the money, the bloodstains, Julia. I spoke in circles, every word cracked with disbelief. The detective listened quietly, scribbling notes, his expression unreadable. "Self-defense," I whispered, my voice breaking. "He would have killed me." Detective Harris leaned back. "We believe you. But Mrs. Whitmore, this isn't just about tonight. This is about everything that came before." The trial was brutal. The courtroom buzzed with curiosity, strangers dissecting my marriage as though it were theater. Photographs of Daniel's past surfaced. Police records, violent altercations, debts tied to dangerous people. Julia's name appeared again and again. She was found days later. Not alive. Her body surfaced by the river, bruised and broken. Another secret Daniel had tried to bury. The prosecution painted him as a man unraveling under the weight of his own sins. The defense tried to salvage his reputation, but the evidence was damning. And me? I was torn apart on the stand. Some saw me as a survivor, others as a manipulator who struck first. I carried both images, neither fully mine. In the end, the verdict favored me, self-defense, freedom. But freedom came with a cost. The house became a mausoleum, every corner haunted by echoes of our life together. The laughter at dinner parties, the smiles staged for photographs, the mask of happiness I had worn too long. Friends kept their distance, whispers following me down grocery aisles. Reporters camped outside, hungry for sound bites. When the noise faded, what remained was silence. A silence heavier than Daniel's presence had ever been. Yet somewhere in that silence I discovered strength. I had survived him, survived the cage, survived the truth. But survival is not the same as peace. And as the months passed, I realized the real story wasn't about Daniel's crimes or Julia's death. It was about what was left of me. The camera pans slowly across the empty Whitmore house. The dining table is set but untouched, chairs pulled neatly under as though waiting for a family that will never return. The lens lingers on the kitchen tiles, faint discolorations where blood once spread. A narrator's voice cuts through the silence, steady and somber. They were the picture of perfection. Daniel and Emma Whitmore, successful, admired, envied. But behind closed doors, their marriage unraveled into secrecy, manipulation, and violence. What began as whispers in the dark ended in a pool of blood. Old photographs appear on screen. Daniel with his arm around Emma, both smiling for the camera. Their joy looks convincing, but under the cold filter of hindsight, it feels staged. Friends described Daniel as charming, devoted, Emma as graceful, loyal. But beneath the surface lay Daniel's hidden past: debt, violence, betrayal. When Julia Myers, a woman tied to that past, resurfaced, the carefully constructed facade collapsed. The documentary shifts to Emma's trial footage. She sits small in the witness stand, voice trembling as she recounts the night Daniel died. The screen freezes on her tear-streaked face before fading into black and white stills of Julia, her story lost in the shadows of his crimes. Two women, one silenced by death, the other scarred by survival. The narration pauses, replaced by Emma's own voice, recorded months after the verdict. Her tone is soft, almost detached. They called me free. They said I survived him. But sometimes when the house is quiet, I still hear his voice, still feel his hand on my arm. It's like he's there, watching, reminding me that freedom doesn't come from leaving the cage. It comes from forgetting it ever existed. And I can't forget. The final shot shows Emma walking alone along a beach, the horizon gray, her figure small against the vast sea. Her face isn't visible, only her silhouette, shoulders bowed under invisible weight. The narrator closes. In the end, the Whitmore marriage became another cautionary tale, a reminder of how love can mask control, how secrets can fester into violence, and how even survival carries its own prison. Was Emma Whitmore truly free? Or was she forever bound by the dark secrets that destroyed her happy family? The screen fades to black. A single line appears in stark white letters.